Hello, everybody, and welcome to this year's TEDxYouth ACSAmman event. My name is Nadim Tabbar, and I'm the head organizer for this year's event. We've decided to do the event over 2 days, so I'll also be your host today and tomorrow. Before we begin, I would like to address the elephant in the room. When this year started, I was confident that we would have a regular event by this time in the year. But clearly, unfortunately, our situation hasn't changed enough for us to be able to do that. At the same time, the irregular has become regular. We were able to hold an in-person TEDx event last year in the theater right before COVID hit Jordan. However, we decided to keep everyone's safety our number one priority, and the TEDx team collectively decided on having a digital event. That being said, we have lots of really interesting speeches prepared that the students have worked hard all year to prepare. Let me take this opportunity to extend my sincere thanks to two special teachers who volunteered their time and supported this process. Mr. Sisko, Ms. Pike, thank you for all your efforts. TEDx really wouldn't have been able to happen without you. I would also like to thank Mr. Willis for his continuous support. Now, I would like to show a quick video explaining what TEDx is all about.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons. People gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Now, I know that everyone is sick and tired of hearing bad news, like new strains of COVID, or about how many countries are undergoing major recession, or even the devastating loss of life due to COVID. Last year, our event was called 2020 Vision. I think we were all really hopeful for this new decade to begin. But we started out with the Australian wildfires, and it only went downhill from there. And yet, despite the devastating effects, there were many positive outcomes to this year. We were all able to spend some quality time with the people at home. Some of us took up new hobbies and obtained some new skills, and not to mention the positive effect that COVID had on the environment. There's always an opportunity to find the silver lining in a tough situation. The theme of this year's event is thriving on turmoil. It is thriving despite the turmoil, despite the obstacles and the hardships. The times we were able to find the silver lining in a dire situation. Now, before we get into the many exciting speeches we have lined up, I would like to begin by showing a short video of one of the first TED Talks I ever remember watching. It was when a new term was first coined, and it's one of the dispositions necessary to thrive on turmoil.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smart
Notification, message, email.
stop! Too many ads. Smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. About getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. As we grow up, we start to form a sense of self-worth and identity. And the problem is that most of the time, we tend to compare ourselves to others. Anishka, a junior ACS, will tackle the ideas that surround identity.
Identity. Google defines it as the characteristics determining who or what a person or thing is. My AP Psychology textbook would define it as the stage that teenagers go through when they're exploring their independence and also forming their own sense of self. Now, this is a really fancy way of saying that teenagers tend to test out their personalities and try to act differently to see what works best for them. One part of that would be self-worth. And that is what makes us unique, worthy, and different from everyone else. When I was little, I was very confused with my self-worth. Who was I as Anishka? Am I defined by my grades, my looks and personality, or even my culture? I found that this wasn't the only case with me growing up. Every single kid has a struggle with trying to find their identity as they get older. They're trying to find out their interests, their passions, and even who to be friends with. A huge factor of that would be environmental influences. So that means some teenagers may adopt their parental values early on, and others of a particular peer group. All in all, children will be trying to change themselves to fit in. But there is a problem with that. Sometimes we try to fit in too much. We try to put so much pressure on ourselves to conform to everyone else that we collapse. During around late middle school or early high school, I was constantly stressed about my self-worth, and I would be determining it based off of my grades and what I was good at. If I was not good at something that everyone else was good at, I would enter times where I would get so frustrated. I would be disappointed about why I wasn't as good as this person at a hobby or why my grades weren't as high as this other person's. And some questions that many people constantly ask ourselves are, why couldn't I get better grades when they are the best of it? Why am I not as good as them at something? How could they get so successful when all I could do is this? We still occasionally ask ourselves these questions. When I was little, I would constantly get asked insulting and strange questions about my culture. And I wouldn't utter a single word as I laughed along and pretended to pretended to make fun of who I was. To be fair, they were just children. And as children, we didn't know better on how to respectfully ask questions. I would start to hide myself. I would lie about my family's traditions, what I stood for, and even what I ate. I got so accustomed to it that when I went back to India for the summer vacations, my hometown would be so foreign, and I would feel like an outsider. Now, because I'm Indian, I used my culture as an example. But I have noticed that many kids find it hard to fit in just because of the lack of cultural awareness and, of course, their own identity. I went from overthinking and caring too much to realizing that in the end, my self-worth is not based off my grades or how much I'm like other people. And to be completely honest, it took me forever to realize this, and I'm still obviously not perfect. Now, during the later years of my high school, again, I started to realize it doesn't matter what they're doing, as long as I'm showing growth as an individual. After all, this is what makes me unique, and it's what makes me different. Kids don't need the extra pressure of unhealthily comparing themselves to others, as growing up is hard enough. We have all of these academic pressures that schools put onto us to get good grades, maintain after school activities, and even have a social life. My identity isn't something that you could label into one sentence, but it's a combination of a multitude of factors weaved into each other. As Anishka, I could be my cultures, my passion, my personality. I could be all of those things or none of those things at all. I could be something completely different than what I perceive myself to be. But the important part is, I stopped comparing myself to others and I started embracing myself. Now, if I could change one thing about my childhood, is that I should have realized this way sooner. I should have not cared about every single part of people's opinions or expectations in early, high, and middle school. But of course, I cannot change the past. So all I can do is stay true to myself as I'm experiencing the challenging world. Thank you.
Thank you, Anishka. Next up, we have Finn. Finn is a junior at ACS who's very passionate about politics. He believes that schools are trying to stay unpolitical to avoid conflict in the classroom. Finn will be talking about how this tactic has grave negative consequences that are already starting to show in the youth of today.
January 6th, 2021. As doing many evenings, I watched the news. It showed the voting of the new US president by the electors in the US Capitol. The Capitol was a sunny island of democracy and a wild sea of protesters, which believed the election to be fake because Trump had twittered so, back when he could Twitter. But then, just 1 hour later, I got the shocking news. They'd gotten into the Capitol. They'd stormed it because they blindly believed what Trump had said without thoroughly considering his arguments. But how could this have happened? I believe that such events are triggered by conspiracy theories and organizations such as QAnon, or in my home country, the so-called Reichsbürger. Around the world, people are increasingly mixing up fairy tales with reality. Around the world, people are more likely to believe comments on social media than scientific papers which have been reviewed numerous times. Professional journalism is no longer what many of us rely on. Obviously, this needs to change, and it needs to change early on, that is, at schools. I think that there should be more political controversy and more political education at schools. When I say politics, I mean the current important decisions that are taken all around the world and the discussion around them. But it also includes the larger processes and goals worldwide. I'm a high school student, and I experienced the lack of controversy several times throughout this past year. For example, there was the US election. I would have liked to discuss it and hear my classmates' opinions on it. And still going on, there's COVID-19. What were the different strategies that governments applied? Who gained or lost power because of it? Asking these questions would have benefited everyone in the community by raising awareness and clearing up potential misconceptions surrounding the topic. So it's obvious that students need more political controversy. Is it? Why do students even need political education and controversy? Because a true democracy only works if its citizens vote based on their own opinion, not the opinion they were influenced by. A true democracy only works if its citizens are politically informed and active, And activism only happens when people firmly know their opinion, which can be hard. At our school, we are sometimes encouraged to think critically, and from time to time, we are even told to take a stance on a topic. Yet, most of the topics that we cover at school are not linked to greater current politics. Yet, that is exactly the important part, because outside of school, we are being swayed by conflicting ideas and opinions on politics. And we'll have to take our own solid stance just using the media that reaches us. So we must learn questioning and reconsidering our own opinions at school in a safe environment, such as school. If we are thrown into the rough sea without having learned to swim, we'll drown. But we can learn swimming at pools where there are lifeguards. Now, some of you might say that I'm exaggerating a bit, that the problem hasn't arrived yet. But I can assure you that at this school, there are students which believe that COVID is made up by the Chinese government, or that vaccination is dangerous and better not done. And based on the amount of people at this school who are trapped in a filter bubble, unquestioning, imagine how many millions of others there must be across the world with a similar worldview. The thing is that we all need politics, because if we don't learn about it, we'll most likely become inactive citizens without a voice and without the ability to differentiate between facts and lies. So it's absolutely necessary for all of us to get a political education. Now, it's obvious that we need to bring more politics into the classroom, but how should this problem be solved? Before we discuss a topic, it's important to learn about it. And when I say learning about politics, I don't mean that a Republican teacher will teach the children to be Republican. Learning about politics is that each student builds their own political world map, which then serves as a structure for new information to be inserted in. If the larger processes of the past and present are understood, we can comprehend the single decisions that leaders take. To do this, a mandatory world politics class should be established. Only one semester of it would dramatically improve the overall education of students. Once we've built this political world map, we are ready to discuss, predict, and take stance on what is currently happening and what will happen in the future. Discussions could take place during school events, afternoon activities, or even as a designated class. They could be for personal enlightenment or as debates. There would also be more politics introduced to subjects like history or English. This would include reading party platforms and other political texts. And the newfound information will insert back into the political world map that we built before. We'd also learn about the structure of governments and how they came to be. And we learn about the internal politics of countries, about which we maybe don't know so much about. That will help us understand their decisions on an international level, but it will also give us a whole new perspective, a more local one than analysis of big worldwide patterns. Our school, ACS, has already done some efforts to point the students' learning in the right direction. For example, there's Middle East history, which provides a good background on what is currently happening in the Middle East politically. Then there's AP Comparative Government, which analyzes the government systems of 6 different countries across the world. But more politics would even be better, because Middle East history is neither offered at most schools, nor is its scope worldwide. And AP Comparative Government only looks at the government systems of countries without analyzing what is currently happening there. So there are still some limitations to the amount of politics in the classroom, but reducing them is always a step in the right direction. Now, parents, I think that you should let your children go. Do you really want them to go through life unquestioning? Because that is dangerous. We have, or will in the very soon future, come in contact with politics, manipulating algorithms, and conspiracy theories. Do you really want that we haven't practiced questioning in a safe environment before we face these challenges? Do you really want us to be mentally sleeping? I'm not a parent, but I wouldn't want that for sure. And students, it might sometimes seem like politics is all about all white men speaking. But really, politics is a non-fiction story and life with real climaxes and unexpected turns. Once you've discovered the beauty of politics, I'm sure you'll want to discuss how the current story continues. And schools. You could improve by establishing a world politics class or organizing educated discussions, and by weaving more politics into subjects like history or English. Finally, you could also teach us about the internal politics of countries. Only through that, we can prevent communities from blindly believing into untrusted sources and conspiracy theories. Thank you.
Thank you, Finn. Next up, we have Jude. Jude is a junior at ACS, and she'll be revealing the beasts within beauty. Her speech aims to prove how a sole beauty standard doesn't really exist.
I'd like to start off with a riddle. It's a 9-letter word that almost all of society is obsessed with. B-E-A-U-T-I-F-U-L. Beautiful. But what is the true meaning of beauty? I'm on a mission to find out. I decided to start with a definition of beauty to truly understand how one could obtain the title of a beautiful person. Google says that beauty is, quote, a combination of elements such as shape, color, or form that pleases the aesthetic senses, especially the sight. But this makes absolutely no sense to me. How can a single person have all these different qualities in order to win the title of a beautiful person? Not to mention how brief this definition was. What did these beautiful qualities consist of? Black skin, white skin, big eyes, small eyes, curvy body, slim thighs? When I was in elementary school in Canada, I was constantly surrounded by girls with blonde hair and blue eyes wherever I went. Exhibit A, me and my best friend Sasha. I'd look at myself in the mirror and ask myself why I looked so different. Why I had Arab features such as big eyes, thick hair, and olive skin. I'd go home turning on Disney Channel as I'd scan the screen for someone, anyone, who looked the way I did. Nothing. My parents told me I came from Palestinian heritage, yet I couldn't wrap my mind around what that meant because I was too busy trying to become white to the point where I, in a sense, was washing myself of my own beautiful culture. This is not something that should be normalized. The issue at hand was that I, with my Arab features, was trying so hard to fit into Eurocentric beauty standards, something that I would never accomplish, no matter how hard I tried. It's like forcibly placing a puzzle piece into the wrong spot. In order to do that, you have to keep cutting and chipping away at that puzzle piece until it's broken and nothing is left. Beauty standards are constantly changing depending on where in the world you are. In the West, the view on beauty is tall, slender, but busty women with delicate features. While in India, people tend to lighten the color of their skin and slim down in order to hold court with people of the West, rather and embracing their own features, such as thick, lustrous hair. Being pale is considered as beautiful. Therefore, according to beauty standards, if your skin isn't as white as snow, then you are not beautiful. Well, I say that's false. In America, most people get braces because straight teeth is considered as beautiful. While in Japan, curved teeth is considered as cute and quirky. Don't forget that men also struggle with beauty standards, as society constantly expects them to be tall, lean, and muscular. We as a society are chasing after beauty standards as they change from country to country and culture to culture. Most of the time, we don't even know which beauty standard we're chasing after. We're just too busy trying to be titled as beautiful. These expectations are so ridiculous because no matter how hard we try, our natural genetics will never achieve them. We can't change our height. We can't change our skin color. We can't change where we come from. And most importantly, we cannot and should not change who we are for beauty standards. Beauty standards are enforcing the intoxicating idea that bodies should be treated like fast fashion. Continuing my mission, I dug even deeper to figure out how to achieve a perfect body. Even you could have a body that finally meets society's beauty standards. Step 1, you'll never achieve the perfect body simply because it doesn't exist. Step 2, you'll never achieve the perfect body simply because it doesn't exist. Step 3, you'll never achieve the perfect body simply because it doesn't exist. Let's have a history lesson and go back to the Renaissance times, where having a full figure was considered as ideal. This was a symbol of wealth and being able to put food on the table. In the 1920s, a youthful, boyish figure was in. Think flapper dress. Then again, in the 1950s, the beauty expectation was having an hourglass shape, just like Marilyn Monroe. In the 1990s, everyone wanted to be extremely skinny. Think Victoria's Secret model. So, what's the beauty standard of today? Having the perfect butt like Kim K. The rates that people are getting injections and filters in order to achieve a naturally unachievable figure has increased 429% since 1997. Why? Beauty standards. So if you've struggled to fit into these standards set by society, that's because bodies cannot and should not be treated like in or out like fast fashion. Approximately 46% of elementary school children want to be on a diet. Let me say that again. Approximately 46% of elementary school children want to be on a diet. These young children whose bodies are still premature and growing are slowly being weaved into society's intoxicating standards. I'm telling you this because we need to identify the root of the issue. 6-year-olds are becoming conscious of their bodies as they try to shape them into a figure that they think society will be pleased with. This early exposure to diet culture will easily lead to eating disorders in the future and is teaching young children to hate their body from an early age. As a result, kids are starting to believe that they are not beautiful. Throughout the years, I learned to embrace my Arab features. I started following more Arab women on social media to expose myself to their different yet charming type of beauty that I can actually see myself in. For me, it was a difference in exposure. While my friends are beautiful, I would never fit into the North American beauty standard because I was blessed with my Middle Eastern genes. Once I realized this, I was finally able to accept myself for who I truly was. So, to anyone out there who struggles with beauty standards, why not make your own standards? Tailor them to your specific needs. Do what makes you feel happy and healthy because no matter what you do, society will never be pleased. Altogether, we should get rid of beauty standards because they enforce the intoxicating idea that bodies should be treated as fast fashion. They change depending on where in the world you are, and they are overall poisoning our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. Next up, we have Yoke. Mental health issues are a struggle for a lot of people, and in recent years, there's been a clear link between teens' mental health issues and school. Yop, another junior at ACS, will be talking about this correlation and the negative effects that it has on students.
I want you to think back to a time where you were so busy with work that you couldn't even think about how stressed you were. If you're in school, you can probably pinpoint a couple of times each year you felt like this. When you go to school and you have test after test, and then you go home and still have homework and projects to do. The Mental Health Foundation describes stress as, quote, the degree to which you feel unable to cope with pressures that are unmanageable. It is no secret that stress can be bad for your health, let alone your mental health. When you're stressed, you're in a natural state of fight or flight. When in fight or flight, you're in a constant state of being able to react to a dangerous situation. For example, if you have a fear of public speaking, you might speak quickly in order to finish your presentation quicker and be able to escape. Although stress can be useful, this is only when it's in small amounts and not often. However, when you're in a constant state of stress or you're in extreme states of stress often, your stress begins to wear you down. The General Adaptation Syndrome, also known as GAS, describes the way you react after being introduced to a new stressor. At first, your body's resistance to stress lowers. You feel extreme stress in a short amount of time. However, as time goes by, you're able to adapt to the stress and use the stress to benefit you. And that is called the resilience stage. The last stage is the exhaustion stage. If you still have this stressor in your life and you enter the exhaustion stage, you're tired, you can't focus as much, and your work doesn't end up as amazing as it could have. As a junior in high school, I can tell you that majority of my stress comes from school or is due to a school-related reason, meaning that school has a direct impact on my mental health. And I'm not the only person who thinks this. In the UK, there are 850,000 students with a mental health disorder. And these students say that a lot of their stress comes from their school exams. Although school seems to be the main contributor to students' mental health issues, it could also be a main way to fight against this epidemic. Schools can do things such as letting their students take days off for a mental health day, allowing students to do things they enjoy, such as sleeping in, reading a book, or baking, might benefit the student in the long run. They're less likely to get burnt out or enter the exhaustion stage in the General Adaptation Syndrome. Students would be able to perform better in school and would be able to do better things. Another way schools can prevent students' mental health from worsening is by allowing students to speak to people. Some schools already have counselors, which have been proven to be beneficial, but some students might not feel comfortable talking to these counselors, as they might not feel comfortable asking for help, or there might not be any confidentiality agreement in place. Schools can counteract this by having people that are not linked to the school speak to students during school hours. Or schools could have the counselor put in place a confidentiality agreement, allowing the student to speak about their issues in a private manner, knowing that no one else will know, which might make the student feel more comfortable. Schools have a direct impact on their students' mental health, but they are also one of the main ways we can fight against it. So if schools don't begin to step up and recognize the impacts they do have on our mental health, they're going to jeopardize our long-term, not only our long-term mental health, but our long-term health as a whole. Students matter, and so does their mental health. So schools should start caring about it.
Thank you so much, you. Finally, as our last speaker of today, we have Oliver. The weight of the world's problems has caused our generation to lose hope, but we've made progress on those problems before. Oliver, another junior at ACS, will be introducing how, as a society, we can collectively fix those problems and restore that hope.
A girl was born in a world full of hopes and dreams, a place where trees still grew and hands interlocked like they were made for each other. A boy grew up in a world full of wonders, innovations of what one could call magic, what we all called magic when we were too young to understand. Instant communication, images, knowledge, all brought to life at the press of a button. And now we call it technology. And now that wonder is a distraction, a flaw. Imagination has no place among test bubbles and fake smiles and that 15th desk job. In the US, 2 out of 5 teens think their world will only grow worse. They say their children have no future. They see the world in a downward spiral with no one doing a single thing to stop it. In Kenya, 19 out of 20 teens think their world will only grow better. Why is it that the more we have, the more we expect to lose? Why is it that mental health is plummeting in the generation that has it all? I have a theory. Apathy, lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. According to the world, our generation just can't be bothered to care. We have no drive, no passion. We're just sitting around talking instead of acting to fix the things that matter most. Those phones have clouded our minds and made us complacent as the world falls apart around us. They tell us words aren't good enough to fix things. They tell us we have to focus on the next class, the next exam, the next college application, because grades and diplomas are the only things that make a difference. We can't care about our friends, our health, our creativity. It's all worth nothing unless it can be quantified. We have to keep our heads down, get to work, and stop worrying about the things we can't control. They tell us that working hard is the only thing that will fix this. But there's a pandemic, there's racism and poverty and violence, and we can't fix it all like this. We can't keep hoping those issues will fix themselves. They tell us we don't care enough, we have our priorities all wrong, but they're the ones who've ignored Greta Thunberg and Bana Alabed and Kamosi Nalasula. When children are so terrified that they're begging the world to act, something is wrong. Thoughts and prayers from another too rich CEO aren't going to cut it. These issues demand real change. You see the people in charge respond like this, and you wonder if they even care anymore. You wonder if they're the ones who are apathetic. Our generation cares more than anything. We care, but we're stuck on the sidelines as the rich and powerful leave the world to rot. You can't go a day without finding another school shooting or racial lynching on your newsfeed. Not to mention the polar vortex or the brush fires or the countless species going extinct around the world. You keep reading, you keep scrolling, you have to know how bad it is, no matter how awful it makes you feel. Why can't you stop? Why can't you just stop and step away? Try to put down the news for a moment. Take a pause. Be present. Be here. Inhale. Exhale. Listen to me. I'm not going to lie to you. It's bad. We don't live in a perfect world, far from it. Things really are getting better, and we have to keep fighting. We cannot afford to stagnate, and I mean that. We can't stop here. Climate change will end the world, even though COVID hasn't. We need to do something about these issues, and we need to do it now. I am tired of watching the world fall apart without a fight. We have to be done with empty words and kind regards. We've learned they're not enough. We need to stand up and we need to fight. Don't listen when they tell you to give up, when they tell you you're not good enough. You can't do it alone. None of us can, but we can do it together. We have a global platform, and now more than ever, we need to use it. They tell us technology is a distraction, but it's a gift. That knowledge, that education, and that support, those are the tools we need to create real change. We have the power to make our voices heard. We can spread awareness, we can raise funds, we can petition for reform. And the tools we're using are working. COVID relief has saved countless lives, and vaccines will save even more. This could have been another terrible pandemic where survival of the fittest won out, but we refused to let that happen. We stood up and we demanded change. The global experience that was 2020 lit a spark, a dream. It showed so many people around the world that things can change, that they are changing, and that every voice matters. There are so many issues in the world that need fixing, and it's too much for anyone to handle alone. But our strength is not in one extraordinary soul, one single solution. It's in collaboration. We have strength in numbers. Together, we can pick up the pieces and make something better of them. Together, we can create a world of hope and dream. Together, we can save our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliver. End of day one of our TEDx event. I hope that those of you watching will join us again tomorrow for another round of super interesting speeches. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Anishka, Finn, Jude, Joop, and Oliver for sharing your really interesting talks with us today. I hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.